David, a lot of people were emailing me about our show last week where we went to the BBC Broadcasting House there in London. People loved it, the tour and all the things that we discovered. It was a fascinating trip. How are you today, David? Looks very cold there.
I'm very well, but yeah, you can see I'm wrapped up. It's not because it's cold where I live, but I have a cold, so if I cough and splutter, I hope I can continue, but I might not want to talk too long, in short bursts, perhaps.
Absolutely. Well, you know, we're continuing now to release the videos that we created on our trip to the United Kingdom. That was a few weeks ago at this point, but it's too much material to release all at once, and we were traveling all around, didn't necessarily have access to live streams. I like this format because it gives us an opportunity to reflect and to let people know that they can see these exclusive videos by becoming sponsors either on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. There's a huge library of videos that you and I have done together. So when people become sponsors, they get access to all of that in addition to keeping the show sustainable. Obviously, it's very expensive to travel around in pursuit of the truth. What we're going to be showing today in just about an hour when the show begins is our trip to Fishmonger's Hall. Now, this was in the news, of course, a couple of weeks ago. There was that stabbing outside of Fishmonger's Hall. The lawyer, Jack Merritt, was attacked and killed by somebody who he drove to the event. You alerted me to that. I had no idea that he had driven him to the event. I found it very strange, David, that the London police called it terrorism, given that the perpetrator knew the victim. That seems more like a targeted killing, like a crime of murder than terrorism. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. And the man was wearing an electronic or an ankle tag. And ankle tags were introduced, the idea was introduced in 1983 at St. Erin's Hotel by Tom Stacey of White's Gambling Club. And it was picked up, and eventually a major contract was awarded to the company that we love to hate, that should have been dismantled many moons ago, but maybe we'll get there in the end. Anyway, Serco. And Serco was charged, but never convicted, of defrauding the taxpayer with 3,000 fake tags, where the people supposedly tagged were either dead, back in jail, abroad, or had never been arrested. And the problem, of course, of that is, potentially, it gives you access to a virtual network of, well, killers or extortionists or people who make snuff films or whatever. So we got something really extraordinary. What I love to do or try to do is connect through the patent office different time scenes in different time zones. And I found something amazing. You remember outside the BBC Broadcasting House, we saw a number of interesting statues carved by Eric Gill. And one of them someone very kindly wrote in to the show, and she, I think it was a lady, had been able to identify what was written on that book, Obsculta. Now, Obsculta apparently is the first word of the Benedictine order, which means listen and obey. So if you can find that sculpture and zoom in on it, what I believe is, I would like to invite Christians, people who really believe in some of the basic principles of Christianity. Now, I went to a Methodist boarding school in England, and I came away, I was regularly educated. You know, we had religious ceremonies every Sunday. And what I felt I drew from that, I enjoyed my education. It was a boarding school. I think I came out with two principles. One is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And inasmuch as you do this to the least of my brethren and sisters, and I think what I infer from that in particular is children, you do it unto me. Now, you and I are blessed. We've got good health. We've grown up probably in loving families, Jason, and we've seen evil, or secondhand, we've experienced evil on a scale that might well be described in JFK's words: we are opposed by a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy that believes in infiltration and not invasion, and guerrillas by night and not armies by day. Now, if you can get that sculpture, you see what it shows.
But sorry, David, here's the interesting thing, and this plays into everything that you and I explore. So we're here, Google Earth has two sort of modes to it, right? We're typically exploring these 3D maps of cities and different areas, and this is very interesting. It's my understanding that Google Earth is able to use photogrammetry, and by having, you know, a ton of images from satellites, they can recreate these 3D buildings. And then when you zoom into the ground level like this, we can see there's a certain, you know, level of detail, or actually a lack of detail. You can see sort of blurriness in the photos there. So what I typically do is I grab this little icon of a man, and you can drop it on these different blue lines, and that gives you the street view. But there's something very interesting happening right here, David. You may be able to see that the blue line is cut right here at the spot on the street view where we would have a good view of that sculpture that we're trying to see. And we've only got a real, see, I can't go to this portion of the street and look at it dead on. So I guess it's a very good thing that we went to the broadcasting house to be able to see this thing in detail and really read what's on there. You can't see the book in this image. What do you think of that?
Well, okay, let's just... yeah, well, I think that's quite possibly, it might be happenstance. It might be that it's blurred out because they don't want, let's say, Christians to pick up the message. But I'm saying this was carved in 1934. It was commissioned by the Director General of the BBC at the time, Lord Reith, who went to Gresham School, and this might be a little roundabout way, but Gresham School was founded in 1555, and it handles the endowments for Fishmonger's livery company, and has done since 1555. And as you know, Jack Merritt was actually killed or stabbed to death in the washrooms of Fishmonger's Hall. The man who killed him escaped out onto the road and ultimately was held down by the crowd. The crowd was told to stand back. The police came up. He was alleged to have had an explosive vest, and he was shot dead. So, right, but I thought we saw some images where there was no blood, and we saw some other images where the corpse allegedly got up and walked away. But maybe I don't want to digress too much. Excuse me. What I'm getting at is that image of the boy Christ is what I would describe, and I'm not an expert, it's a sexualized image, because whatever the angel is that's holding the book is holding it under his private parts. You can see the text Obsculta, which is the Benedictine monastery injunction to listen and obey, and listen and obey in the hands of an international broadcaster of world repute. In fact, the world's largest and most powerful news broadcaster in the world. I don't like to be told to listen to the BBC and obey whatever it comes out with. Mm. And I believe Christians should be particularly incensed, because I would say, again, I'm not an expert in this, this is a sacrilegious image. It's mocking, it's cynical, it's sexualizing the Christ. Christ is being, I would say, perhaps interrogated, almost in a style of being tortured into behaving how, in whatever way that his torturers deem is appropriate. Now, this is 1934. Across the way from Broadcasting House, as we see, is the Langham Hotel.
Now, wait a minute.
And in the Langham Hotel...
This is very weird, David. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it seems to really, really not want us to get a view of that thing. Even when I tried to place the character across the street, it's putting us someplace else. I don't know, David.
Well, all I can say is, if I'm right, and we can get, and you hear in what we hear up in Canada, that you have the Christian right in the United States, and that is deemed to be a real hardcore prejudice kind of group. I believe the Christian right, or excuse me, any Christians should take a look at this statue, and maybe they can interpret it and find out if I'm wrong. But I'm saying this is a demonstration of an attitude that's deeply embedded in the BBC that involves pedophile entrapment and bribery and extortion, right? And is completely dismissive of the values of the Judeo-Christian church, in particular, families and the sanctity of the children. Because this is, incidentally, the sculptor, Eric Gill, was a pedophile. He raped his own daughters. He raped the family dog, and apparently raped his wife. He's held up as a hero of the arts movement in the early 20th century. But I think that culture prevailed in the BBC right through World War II. And let me just mention, we'll certainly be coming back to Fishmonger's Hawk. In World War II, there was the Cambridge 5 spy ring, and in the aftermath, and many of them stayed regularly at the Langham Hotel. Victor Rothschild, who was the chairman of the Royal Commission of Gaming in 1972, he loaned his apartment to Guy Burgess and Anthony Blunt, where they would have homosexual and pedophile orgies. And it is said that Anthony Blunt favored strangling a child, a young boy, while he was sodomized by a man called Soxon Rothschild. You pointed out that in that statue on the right, it looked like that the boy was quite possibly being penetrated by the man. What I'm saying is these statues should be torn down. Didn't it JFK say, bring this wall down? I'm saying, take Reagan. Those statues. Oh, was it Reagan? I thought it was, yes, Reagan. You're right. Yeah. Because you see, what we've got now running into this impeachment proceedings, if we follow very carefully the way it's being played by the BBC is setting up Trump to be impeached. Now, people might say, well, how can they possibly do that? Well, let me run back. It's basically the decision is going to be taken in the Senate, right? And it will only require a small number of Republican senators to cross the floor, if that's the right term, and vote for the removal of Donald Trump. Well, why might they do that? Well, let's go back to 911. That fourth plane, had it left on time, it was called United 93, it left 41 minutes late, it would have hit the Capitol building at the same time as the flight AA-77, flown by the US Naval Academy colleague of Phil McConnell, allegedly hit the Pentagon and killed everyone in the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center. There was, as I understand it, a joint meeting of the House. If that plane had hit on time, and assuming there were explosives inside the building, America would have been decapitated, right? All of the congressmen and senators would have been killed, right? And then, well, the future is an open book. They didn't succeed with that. I think we've got a good feel now for who they are, and it's very closely involved with the insiders of the BBC. So what happened afterwards, there was an attack with anthrax-laced letters. But the anthrax was extremely interesting because anthrax apparently is a bacillus that's really clumpy and it hugs the ground and it doesn't disperse. But this anthrax was weaponized with a silicon-based coating on the anthrax spores with tin in it. And that increases the dispersivity. But there are very, very, very few labs in the world, as I understand it, with the capacity to do that. One of them is Porton Down. Now, Robert Mueller was supposed to have sent a group from the FBI to Porton Down to determine whether or not a scientist had smuggled the AIM strain of the virus, the bacteria, out of Porton Down, but he never did it. So let me go back. What I think we're seeing there with that image of the Christ crucified and being told through that obsculta book, basically the BBC is saying to Christians, listen and obey. We control global broadcasting. We have the technology through that spoken text display apparatus for the generation of TV signals. And here's where I hope I don't I hope I don't create a perception in the audience that this is so outrageous it can't be possible. I believe those TV signals or television signals that are being produced are used by torturers to enhance the pain of the victim at some of the movies that are being made, for example, at Starnet Communications in Vancouver. Now that's pretty horrific, but then think about it, right? You're just showing that image of the schematic. You've got someone looking through a screen, right? The system itself is generating TV signals, and I think you and I could legitimately say, what could you do with those TV signals? Well, what about sending the telemetry signals to the weapons platform that's taking out the Pentagon? What about sending the telemetry signals to the person who might shoot a biological bullet into the body of a woman inside the studios at 425 Carroll Street in Vancouver? What about moving room 101 that was in Broadcasting House across the road into the basement of the Langham Hotel, which dates back to 1865? So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is the BBC is, this sounds maybe for some people perhaps totally far-fetched, I believe it might very well be public enemy number one in terms of whether or not your president is impeached and removed from office in the next couple of weeks. Over to you.
Mm. Now, David, it was very interesting when we went to BBC. A number of people sent, as I said, I mean, it's almost an overwhelming number of emails that I got. It seems this was shared with me not only by our viewers but also a social engineer who we've become quite familiar with. And you knew this apparently. I did not know this, but Room 101 has been recreated by an artist. It's been, you know, they removed it in 2003 or 2004 or something like that, and it's been preserved and recreated by an artist. This might not be an accurate article about it, but I found it interesting because, you know, our viewers are very knowledgeable and they know a lot of different things and they share that with us. The social engineer sent a comment that I just happened to see saying that you and I are dumb for not looking that up on the internet and just knowing that. But I don't think that's the case. Obviously, we could have looked it up on the internet, but there's so much more that we learned by actually going there. Frankly, for you and I to not know that the room has been removed and preserved as a piece of art is less shocking than the information that we learned, which is that virtually no one who worked for the BBC was aware of that. You would think that sort of thing would have been an answer that one of the employees would give us when we asked them about it. Oh, it's been removed and preserved as a work of art, but they didn't. So that in and of itself is interesting. I am also intrigued by the fact that this trip to Broadcast House has, oh, David, are you there? Something's, you're back. Okay.
Yeah, we're back.
Interruption of your signal there.
Yeah,
what I was saying, David,
Jason.
yeah.
I think
Sorry, we're losing you again there, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sorry, you were saying you think what?
Yeah, so actually I did know there was a plaster cast made of the Room 101 and that it went into the Tate Gallery, and there's a picture of Michelangelo's David in the background. But for me, that wasn't particularly relevant, because what I want to know is, did the essence of what went on in Room 101, either in the fiction or the fact, carry over, and they created virtual Room 101 outside Broadcasting House? And I think it's perfectly portable, because remember, the particular style of torture of Room 101 was that you'd take someone who had a paranoia. Winston, in the story 1984, he had a paranoia about rats, and so they made a cage with rats inside, a couple of big rats, and there was a door that, when lifted, would give the rats access to Winston's face, so they could start chewing on his face or in his eyeballs or whatever it was. So this would be totally terrifying for the man, and the objective was not to test his ability to respond to interrogation, right, but to get him to betray his girlfriend or partner, Julia, right? And then she, in a different room, would be subjected to the same process. Now here, let me give you a challenge to the imagination, Jason. What happens if in the modern world there were room 101s that actually created, let's say, in luxury hotels, where someone could book into a hotel and pay to watch someone being tortured at 425 Carroll Street? And they were at risk of being tortured themselves. And what was being asked of them was to break up their resistance to questions, or, you know, in case they were resisting loyalty to Big Brother, and say, do it to her, right? And there's something very, very weird about the succession of murders up in Vancouver, where there's a band playing out at the pig farm or the Burns Road property called Dead on Arrival. And I've been speculating that people were being tortured to death at 425 Carroll Street and their bodies taken out to the pig farm, and they were consumed in cannibal feast or put into the food chain. These are crimes, they're too big just to sit on the shoulders of some guy who's a bit slow-witted, who's allegedly murdered up to 60 to 100 people, but the jury found that there wasn't enough evidence of premeditation and pre-planning, so he got a sort of second-degree life sentence, and he's being moved out of Quebec. But we're moving away from Fishmonger's Hall and Jack.
Well, but
Jack
there's a few
Merritt.
things.
So,
yeah, no, we'll come back to that for sure. But I think it's also important that we talk just a bit more about the trip to the BBC, because it's raising a lot of interesting points. Now, this plaster preservation of Room 101, David, this is the exterior of Room 101. It doesn't really show us anything, or doesn't teach us anything about what was inside Room 101. And this article goes on to tell us that the mysterious room is described as the worst thing in the world. Now, that sounds a lot like the description that the person who you spoke with, whose brother said he'd rather commit suicide than be called to testify about what went on in the pig farm. The other thing I wanted to point out, David, is just back to the Google Earth map, because these little bits of metadata about this are very interesting. Now, as I look at this, David, see, this window seems pretty sharp in terms of its focus, and the sculpture seems comparatively blurry, almost as if it's been blurred out. Now, I was able to place our Street View avatar across the street here, but obviously we can't read the sign and we can't see very clearly what that sign says. I mean, again, it causes me to wonder, are we being specifically prohibited from exploring what is on that sign? I did find a higher resolution image, and of course, people can become sponsors on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, or subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth, and join us on the entire journey. But basically, here's a high resolution version of the image that has just been photographed and posted there, and people can see the sexualization of this, the hands up, the palms exposed, the long hair, as you said, very Christ-like figure who's being sort of addressed in this sculpture in an extremely sexualized way. It is bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, and I believe he's being crucified.
Right.
You can't see the nails, but that would be, you know, palms outstretched, out facing. That's where you bang the nails in, right? Excuse me. So what I'm saying is that could be a kind of representation of a play, a torture play or a snuff film, where you're actually taking someone and observing it from a room in a hotel halfway around the world. Let's say hypothetically on 911, where Bill Clinton is at the Port Douglas Sheraton Hotel at the 12th of September. He could be using these high-speed communications networks, like the fiber optic links, actually watching in real time what's going on in the Pentagon. So I think what happened is, in the BBC, they pioneered the introduction of extremely fast methods of transmitting images, right? And if you go back to the picture that you had earlier with William Stevenson, Sir William Stevenson was the man called Intrepid at the British Security Coordination Unit in New York, and single-handedly, or with the help of a few friends, it's believed that he helped bring America into the war.
Wow.
They forged a map, I believe, in the First World War that showed the Germans, or maybe that was the Second World War, with their designs on South America. But you see, this man, I believe he was making like £20,000 a year for the 18 years of the invention, and I think it took him through from 24 to 1942.
Sounds like a lot of
So
money
the
for
year
that
after,
time.
oh, it's huge. So he became a major investor in Pinewood Studios and Shepperton. And when you think about the ability to transmit an image, that's the best and most concentrated form of a propaganda, because if you can detach the context, like, for example, if you might have taken the context away from the films being recorded in the studios at 425 Carroll Street, I would say by the time of the raid of 20th of August of 1999, there would be of the order of 1 million victims, blackmail victims, around the world of Starnet's hardcore adult and child pornography by August 1999. By the time that technology had developed and grown at another place, and I think, as you know, I believe it to be the United States Customs Service building in New York, building number 6 on 911, I think there could be 10 million victims. Now, what happens if you have around the world an online community of blackmail victims controlled through, let's say, the City and Guilds of London, or Con Air, the prisoner transportation system, or the 8A companies of the Small Business Administration? You have the ability to influence a major political event, such as the impeachment of Donald Trump. Now, as I understand it, the House of Representatives has approved the impeachment. The articles now go to the House, the
They've
Senate,
been transmitted.
to be transmitted. So now, how many Republican senators, and I'm thinking specifically the Republicans would probably be the least likely to vote for the removal of President Trump, how many of those people are vulnerable to hacking and extortion and blackmail? Maybe we should ask Dave Swigart, who's an ethical hacker, whether he thinks that system, the BBC, and I joke not, where you have a spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals, what television signals are we talking about? Are we talking about telemetry signals to planes that are put through decoy and drone maneuvers during an exercise, while the newsreader is prompted by whatever they decide, and I'm thinking specifically of the BBC, to say, for example, we're getting news that the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed 20 minutes before it does. It gives you enormous power to have a high-speed communications network where you're injecting news, and let's say the audience by the end of the day or the end of the week for the BBC was 200 million people. They're told Osama bin Laden attacked America, right? And it's now hardwired into their soul, their psyche. And I'm saying to the Christians specifically, take a look at that sculpture outside Broadcasting House and tell me, or your colleagues or your friends or your fellow Christians, is there any good reason why that statue should not be destroyed? There are many people who've said that this is an appalling image because it seems to celebrate the BBC's fascination for pedophiles, right? Jimmy Savile. Yeah. So Jimmy Savile spent, 50 years in the BBC? I believe he took many of his guests across the Langham Hotel. And why wouldn't the Langham Hotel serve up some, underage child into a room for the purposes of entrapment and blackmail? And why wouldn't the Langham Hotel, which is now part of a global chain, have fiber optic links so that you have real-time access to possibly a blackmail blitz where you want 5 or 6 or 7 Republican senators to vote with the Democrats and remove President Trump, maybe because they don't want to have inhalation anthrax pumped into their air, which is a really unpleasant way to die. Over to you.
Well, it was another fascinating aspect of the trip, David, was our exploration of the Langham Hotel, and we learned a lot about it. It seems to be basically an extension of the BBC. It's right there across the street. and it had the telegraph room, it had the post office. It really is kind of almost just an annex to the BBC, and it's amazing.
And if I may just jump in there,
yeah,
if I may just jump in there, Jason, there was some bombing, I think, of the BBC building and also the West Wing or something of the Langham Hotel. But after the war, the Langham Hotel was taken over by the BBC,
right?
And they put studios in it. Right. So why wouldn't some of those studios be room 101s, except now they're virtual studios?
Right.
Because then you've got the elite moving, Princess Diana and various other people, Haile Selassie, going through the Langham Hotel. As you could see, it was a very luxurious hotel. It's got very good reviews, excellent service. It's no doubt, it's a wonderful hotel. But from a historical point of view, that was where probably the first news came of Abraham Lincoln's assassination through the telegraph cable, and I believe the assassination of JFK. So what I think we can do now is, from a time linked point of view, demonstrate the possibility, we may never be able to prove it, that the Langham Hotel, the owners, the guests, and the staff had a role in alerting opportunities in the city to make a great deal of money by front-running news of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and front-running news that predominantly came over Telstar of the assassination of JFK. Over to you.
Yeah. So people can go back and watch last week's episode to learn more about that. I think that was one of our best episodes so far. And so let's talk, David, a bit about the Fishmongers Hall. So we had an opportunity to visit there as well. And again, it's quite interesting to explore these things. Now, look at this building. It seems to have like a garden on the roof. See, that's the thing, David. Oh, you know what this building was? This, I think, was HSBC, wasn't it? See, we were walking around and being on the ground there, we got to see a lot of interesting things that are going to be revealed to people who join us in just about 30 minutes on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. There's an amazing amount of detail that we learned that, it's the Wells Fargo building. So they've got quite a amazingly luxurious building there with a roof garden and whatever. But what do you want to alert people about that they're going to see in our video where we explore the Fishmongers Hall?
Well, just mentioning Wells Fargo, Wells Fargo was the master server of the leveraged lease on the Twin Towers, right? And they came up with, I believe, through a cartel, about $3.2 billion. Larry Silverstein put in some chump change. And about 6 weeks before the buildings were demolished, Wells Fargo, together with various insurance companies that were shareholders in Serco, changed the terms of the insurance. So there was a possibility or an opportunity for a double occurrence claim, which ran through the court of Justice Hellerstein, the Southern District Court of New York. So what they were trying to do, of course, was double up from 3.2 billion to a claim of 6.4 billion. They didn't succeed, but I think they made about $1.5 billion profit in a 6-week period, which is not bad going if you want to pay off the assurance adjusters on the 47th floor of the North Tower, where Serco had a shareholders meeting on the morning of 9/11. But let's go back to the Fishmongers Hall. So now it appears that this was a conference for a group called Learning Together that was set up by graduates of Cambridge University, some in the criminology department and so on, and ex-convicts. Now, this is interesting because ex-convicts are the kind of people who might be let out of jail early, provided they agree to wear an ankle tag supplied by Serco. What Serco can do then, as we talked about in that patent by Lemelson, is the computer, using artificial intelligence, can monitor the movements of the convict or the ex-convict or the parolee and adjust through artificial intelligence the permitted or prohibited dwell time in a given location, such as the Fishmonger's Hall. My point is, what a weird way of controlling the convict transportation system, because if you wanted to do a favor to a convict who wanted to take out an enemy on bail, on parole from jail, you have the artificial intelligence adjust the permitted time so they have just enough time, let's say, to, I don't know, stab Jack Merritt to death in the washrooms, then stab Saskia Jones to death, and then the guy runs out on the bridge, possibly monitored by a whole bunch of people in the different city and guilds of London, including the Worshipper Company of Security Professionals. And then, as part of the play, staged hypothetically by the BBC, it's arranged so the public believes the guy's been shot.
Right.
Right. But I saw some images. Was that from Ole Damigard?
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't you and I both see the appearance that there was no blood on the sidewalk?
We also saw him, the body covered by a cloth or something, and he lifts it up and looks around. So that was kind of weird.
Yes. So isn't this one of these BBC plays where you have a spoken text display apparatus? That is to say, the BBC newsreader is recounting or describing an event that is perceived using a prompt machine. So she or he reads exactly what is prompted, right? And meanwhile, there are signals, let's say command and control signals, going to the different people in the area to do their particular task. Like, you come along and look like you shoot him, and then someone else comes along and takes the knife away, and another one puts the narwhal tusk. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Right? So you've got all of these city and guilds and speciality companies staging a play that back in the 13th and 14th century, you would call a mystery, a magical, or a miracle play.
Right.
And I think that statue outside Broadcasting House is a miracle play, because my understanding during that period in the 13th or 14th or 15th century, the carpenters would provide the material for the cross, right, on which, you know, the victim, Christ, would be nailed, and that would be run through the streets of the villages and cities of the United Kingdom, or England as it's known then, to impress the peasants. And what these people, and again, it comes back to, I'm extremely irritated to interpret, and it might be just me, that phrase obsculta. That's the injunction to listen and to obey. In the 1984 dystopian novel by George Orwell, there's a statement that Big Brother, or INGSOC, the English Socialist Party, wants you to reject what your eyes see and what your ears hear. That is to say, they are unwitnessing crime scenes systematically, right? They unwitness the crime scene associated with the anthrax attacks in the United States. They unwitnessed the crime scenes associated with the Novichok attacks in Salisbury. They've unwitnessed the crime scene associated with whoever it was that allegedly stabbed Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones to death in Fishmonger's Hall. So we've got a very elaborate network. At the heart of it, the mens rea of this network, I allege, is the BBC. Over to you.
Yeah, and you know, David, in just about 20 minutes when the sponsor exclusive video begins, we also went to this memorial sort of, what would you call it? There's a memorial set up there for Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones.
It's called the monument. It's called
the monument. But there's some flowers and pictures and things that people have left there. So it's definitely a very, I was fascinated. It was really an amazing trip that we took. There's something else I wanted to bring to your attention, David, and this is happening somewhat frequently. You know, no matter how many times we look at these patents and these various things, there's just so much information in them that keeps popping out. This is perhaps one of the first patents that you brought to my attention, this Jerome Lemelson prisoner tracking and warning system and the corresponding methods. I've just realized today, David, do you see how many claims are made in this patent?
Oh, 33, yes, yes, yes.
It's quite interesting how frequently that number is showing up. I wonder if that's not a message to someone about this patent.
Well, quite possibly, but what tickles my interest is the fact that they're using artificial intelligence expert system or fuzzy logic algorithms to determine adjustments in permitted or prohibited dwell times at, for example, crime scenes. So this is a recipe. If someone has access or can hack into the artificial intelligence, right, that does that kind of adjustment, you can bring a team in of killers into New York on 911, which is what I believe Christine Marcy with the Department of Justice prisoner and alien transportation system did. You can stake these people out with their respective guilds around the various areas. And one group focuses on environmental cleanup, taking away an evidence. The information technologists split, and we've discussed that before, the geo-referenced or the time-sensitive data into a repository at the National Crime Squad or National Crime Agency in the UK, which is in the custody of Circuit. So the police, the legitimate police, they've got no means of taking apart this conspiracy that I believe JFK described as a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy. But amongst the entrails of this monstrosity are a whole bunch of social engineers that seem to be coordinated through that social network device where you insert artificial reality messages and georeference data. And then, of course, you have the kinetic social engineering protection appliance. So I believe these characters that criticize us are essentially, they're script kidders, Jason. They have no independent volition or understanding or interest in solving the crime. Their sole purpose in life is to take us or knock us off our rhythm, and it isn't going to work. And it's actually very revealing, because there will come a time when justice is done, when these great crimes are reverse engineered, which is what I hope to be able to do, where the remedy is initially in the civil courts, right? But then all of the people who hid the evidence or manipulated the evidence or planted the evidence are actually exceedingly vulnerable to a penalty that could go up to a long period behind bars and maybe a short period on death row. Over to you.
You know, it's interesting, David, they're branching out into other methods of attacking you and I. They've taken to trying to discredit what you've said about this Kinetic North America social engineering protection appliance, calling it a spam email filter. You've told us in the past how the language in there is talking about how it's detecting semantic and non-semantic data points. So here it even says it's determining whether the one or more non-semantic data items match information stored in a data store of previously collected information, performing behavioral analysis on the one or more non-semantic data items. So semantics, of course, is the branch of linguistics and logic concerned with meaning. So when this refers to non-semantic, I mean, what is it talking about? Is it just talking about words versus videos?
For example, yeah, non-semantic, as I understand, if you have that HTTP ... // right? Those are non-semantic. They're not word and meaningful related. They're just basically instructions embedded in the text or the communications. And what I'm saying is, well, those could be instructions to, okay, shoot this woman with a biological bullet and open up the sports book on how long it's going to take for her to die. They also use the word malicious. Well, I don't take kindly to a piece of code or a system developed by Kinetic North America, and I don't think Americans should either, to allow the people operating that system to determine what is malicious and what is not malicious. Obviously, from the conspirators' point of view, you know, the hardcore adult and child pornographers and the ruthless and monolithic conspiracy, what is malicious is what you and I are doing.
Trying to stop them from distributing that material.
Well, for them, from their point of view, it's malicious. So you'll have all these script kiddies and social engineers coming in from different flanks, etc., etc. But they are defending the indefensible.
Yeah.
And the point is, the beauty of focusing not so much on Serco, because no matter how hard I've been kicking at Serco, and this extraordinary meeting on the 47th floor on the morning of 9/11, nothing happens. That is to say, any normal corporation that was being attacked through vicious or malicious or vexatious or whatever it is, it has a duty to defend itself. Otherwise, it loses the right to defend itself.
At least send a letter telling us to cease and desist. Right.
Right. But it doesn't. Now, the BBC is much more exposed, I think, because every day its newsreaders are pumping out material. So I now am Googling BBC and impeachment, and they intend to give, I believe, live instruction or live information throughout the impeachment hearings in the Senate. And I think that will be slanted, basically, if they can find anything that undermines President Trump's position, right? They're going to put it out there. And then at the back of my mind is this ability for the BBC, through an organizations like at the Langham Hotel, to have virtual room 101s dotted around. And I'm thinking specifically in the 1 million hotels of the Marriott, hotel rooms of the Marriott chain. Basically, you could have virtual room 101s that can be turned on or turned off with signals, television signals, and to create a betting opportunity for whether or not President Trump will be removed from office. Now, can you imagine if $1 billion was being bet through the sportsbook operations of William Hill, one of whose directors is the chairman of Serco? So that means in the background, unknown to Americans, the Trump family, the FBI, etc., there's a huge carrot or boost or bonus or pot available to anyone who can come up with any information, whether it's real or imaginary, whether it's an actual authentic conversation or a note scribbled on that pad from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Vienna, right? Basically, Donald Trump, I believe, if we don't do anything to take the BBC out of the picture, will be removed from office. And I'd like the Christians, right? Not because I have any particular affection for Christians over above Muslims, etc. What I am interested in is what they interpret that image, the 1934 sculpture of Eric Gill, commissioned by Lord Reith, the Director General of the BBC, which I believe is symbolic of a contempt for the values of Judeo-Christian society, and I'm particular in the sanctity of children and the sanctity of marriage. And it's a poison that needs to be eliminated. And that's tragic for me, because I have great affection for the brilliant people, the comedians, the characters in the BBC. I think it's a wonderful organization from a creative point of view, but I think it's fallen foul of some of the most sophisticated hacking and mind manipulation the world has ever seen. Over to you.
Well, David, we're just about out of time for our YouTube preview of what will be discussed in the sponsor-exclusive broadcast that's coming up just over 10 minutes from now on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. One last thought I'd like to leave you with, David. I think, something I've observed and something that may frustrate these social engineers to no end, you've got an almost intuitive sense where even if, as the slab of a man, as you refer to him, even if he's correct that this the tattooed blob, even if he's correct that this Kinetic North America social engineering protection appliance is simply for protecting against email, even if that's correct, you've unlocked the door into a world of technology that we know exists. Patrick Berge told me that he worked for Jim Jones, who was Barack Obama's national security advisor, and they created something called the Shadow Net, which was exactly what you describe, a social engineering tool for controlling the population and their activities on social media. in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that the technology behind that ShadowNet tool has now been integrated into this company that's owned by Jim Jones called ClearForce, that is basically monitoring, they're talking about monitoring your employees to see who's engaged in high-risk behavior that could create problems for you, but it can be applied to anything, criminal activity and financial services. Basically, anyone can use this software, and it's for spying on people. So you've uncovered the social engineering tools and spoken about them in terms of what they're intended to do, and I hope that people will join us when we continue with our sponsor exclusive It's a lot of talking. The sponsor-exclusive broadcast that's going to take people on our tour through London as we go and visit the Fishmongers Hall. It's a fascinating show, David, and thank you so much for helping me create it and for joining me today.
Thank you, Jason. Great show. Bye now.
Absolutely. See everybody there.